In this episode of Talking Taboos, the podcast, we're live from the Unruly Bowels event that we ran back in 2024. It brought together lived experience, health expertise, and industry to talk about one of the most universal taboos, poo, a topic that many of us may find very uncomfortable to talk about. Taboos aren't just difficult topics. They are systems of silence, sustained by embarrassment and shame, and that isolate people from the people around them and from the help they need. As our guests explain, when it comes to bowel health, that silence can be the difference between an early diagnosis and a late one. We hear first from Kat, director of Talking Taboos, and Priscilla, a lived experience advocate, sharing their stories of real life with invisible chronic illnesses, the years of normalising symptoms, the fear of what a Google search might reveal, and the moment a friendship opened up simply because they finally had the right words to describe what they were going through. We're then joined by Amy from Cancer Research UK, who unpacks why shame and judgment keep people from speaking to their doctor about their symptoms, and why "don't be embarrassed" is often exactly the wrong message to send. Claire and Matt from the Andrex marketing team talk us through their Get Comfortable campaign and why a brand best known for a cute puppy and loo roll decided it had a responsibility to help the country talk more openly about its own body. And finally, Nina, a functional medicine health coach, talks about how she can better help her clients when they talk more openly about poo, and makes the case for the Bristol stool chart as one of the simplest, most accessible tools for understanding your own health. Together, we explore why the lack of everyday language around bowel symptoms is a real barrier to getting support and early diagnosis, and why more open and honest conversation could help more people with their health. A note for the listeners: as this episode was audio recorded live, speakers reference material shown on the screen at the event, including the Poosters campaign and the Bristol stool chart. We'll share all of this in the show notes. Please note that this episode includes discussion of bowel symptoms, incontinence, bleeding, and cancer diagnosis. Please listen with care.
We're at the Unruly Bowels event for Talking Taboos, and we're going to be showcasing a number of different conversations around bowel and poo taboos today. And we're starting off with a bit of a conversation about lived experience and how lived experience of conditions can be affected by poo taboo. So as I said, I've been with ulcerative colitis about 7 years ago, and in the lead up to the diagnosis, I had a 9-month flare, and I'd had kind of like ups and downs of symptoms in the past, but I'd never had a flare like that before or experienced symptoms like that before. So the types of symptoms that I was experiencing were things like diarrhea, incontinence, a lot of bleeding, and all of that was hugely embarrassing. It was challenging to talk to people about. It was challenging even kind of answering questions or talking to the doctor about it. I could kind of find myself that I didn't know, because I didn't really kind of like talk about or think about poo very much before that. I found it hard to kind of like talk about and articulate what I was going through. But I think particularly for me, the reflection after I received my diagnosis was that my next door neighbour, who for the last kind of like 9 months I'd been talking in euphemisms about having an upset tummy or just kind of like feeling poorly. And then when I was diagnosed and I was given the label of ulcerative colitis, I was able to say to her, "Oh, I've been diagnosed with colitis," at which point she said, "I've got Crohn's," and opened up a whole heap of conversation that we just hadn't had for the last 9 months, even though we were close and I'd been talking about being unwell. So I think the realization for me was just how much the kind of lack of conversation around it and the embarrassment around talking about the symptoms. If I'd had other symptoms of other conditions, maybe I might have spoken a little bit more openly with people about it. But there was a lot of kind of embarrassment and shame that affected me.
I know, Priscilla, when we chatted the other day, that's something that you mentioned as well, about how there was this normalization or joke around your friends of maybe always being in the loo, but that conversation around the symptoms and what you were experiencing was really hard to come by.
Yeah, absolutely. I would always be the running joke and say, "It's Priscilla, she's in the toilet. She's always in the toilet. Oh, how long does she take to go in the toilet?" Anytime we'd go out, we'd finish a meal. Oh, Priscilla needs to go to the toilet, obviously. Because anytime I ate, it would just flare up my symptoms, which were obviously unknown to me at the time. But it was hard for me because there was not a lot of information out there about inflammatory bowel disease. So it was like, how do I even bring it up to my friends? That's not a topic or something I want to talk about and say, I'm bleeding every time I go to the toilet, or I have to go to the toilet like 16 times a day. So there was no sort of like guidance on how to talk about that. So I kind of normalized it for a really long time. And obviously that led to it being really unhealthy, which a lot of people in my age group do.
And did that kind of like lack of language around it and lack of kind of worry about using the right language affect how you took your symptoms to medical professionals or health professionals as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I remember the first time I went for a colonoscopy, and they give you the shorts with the backless shorts, and sort of like your bum's hanging out, and you feel so embarrassed about it. And I actually thought they gave me like the wrong shorts, so I went to the nurse and was like, "Oh, nurse, there's a hole in my shorts," and she was like, "Oh no, that's supposed to be it." And I was just like, "Oh, okay." So I was there, sort of covering myself up and like holding all the gowns and everything to the toilet, and it was just, I felt so embarrassed. But then there was other people getting colonoscopies, and the women just walked with their bottom out and everything, and I was just like, okay, if she can do it, I can do it. But then it was just difficult because once I had that diagnosis, it was like, how do I approach and tell my doctor about certain things that affected me? Because I think I said bum, and then he was like back passage, and then I said poo, and he said stool, and I was just like, oh gosh, the embarrassment. And then it kind of deters you from like speaking about other things because you don't want to get something wrong, and it's a bit embarrassing. And as much as they tell you, oh yeah, we look at poos every day, it's like I don't really talk about this. It's the first time I'm actually talking about it, so it's embarrassing not knowing the right language around certain things, especially to families as well, family and medical professionals as well.
Interesting that kind of language is part of the medical journey as well as the beginning, as Kat was talking about, with friends or family around you. And I just wondered what the experience has been like for both of you since diagnosis. Is there anything that you have, from going through what you've gone through, would like to see changed?
So for me, I got diagnosed with colitis 3 years ago, and excuse my language, but it's been a living hell. Since I got on that table, they did a colonoscopy, looked at my bowel, and it was literally falling to shreds. It was absolutely a living hell because then I already had other autoimmune conditions, but I normalized it so long, so I considered it to be IBS. So I was for a long time looking at the wrong information until I initially started my first medication. That's when I was like, oh, it's a disease, that not the syndrome. There's not a lot of guidance out there, but it was difficult to understand managing medications.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that in terms of the information. I think subsequent to the diagnosis, I've had so much more understanding of what IBD is, how it relates to the difference between Crohn's and colitis. I was fortunate enough at my hospital, they ran a patient panel, so I was able to hear from kind of different people's experiences. And I think also understanding the kind of like both the kind of like symptoms of the condition, how it can kind of play out, having better language to describe it. Although I'd agree with Priscilla, I still struggle sometimes in doctor's appointments or with other people to kind of like have the right language, which is why I think talking about it's so important. But just more information about, I think, particularly around conditions where there's a lot of kind of shame and kind of stigma around them, as there are with taboos. There's just not the language or the description or the information out there about conditions. I even find now I have to say to people, I've got colitis, it's like Crohn's, because I feel like Crohn's is a better known condition. And then when you start talking about it, and because I'm quite kind of like open about it, you suddenly find you do meet other people with it, you hear a lot more. So I think just more open conversations around it and more information is really helpful.
Stella, if you're okay to share.
Yeah. So like I was saying, there's a lot of initially I thought it was a syndrome. When you kind of look at it initially, there's a lot on bowel cancer. Before I was diagnosed, I sort of Googled my symptoms, as we all do, asked Mr. Google, and it came up with cancer. And I got this immediate fear in me, and I was just like, no, like I was sort of much in like a delusional state, like of denial, basically. And then I was just like, do you know what? It's fine. I just not eat. That was my thing to do. But then it became eating very unhealthily, like not eating at all. If I was going anywhere for like 6-7 hours, I would not eat anything. And I'd come home almost, about to fall on the ground. It wasn't until I went home one Christmas and my mum noticed that, I was just not eating at all. And she questioned me about it. And I was embarrassed because I didn't know what to say. And I was just like, really? Kind of like played it off a little bit.
Your mum's a nurse, isn't she?
Yeah, she's a nurse. So she instantly knew something wasn't right, but she was questioning me. I didn't even know how to even explain it because, all I'd seen was bowel cancer. And I was like, you don't want to sit down and be like, yeah, mum, I think I've got bowel cancer. So, it was, she knew something was wrong and she would always be checking up and whatnot. But, as a nurse, going through the symptoms and things, but she didn't even have a clue what it was. She knew it was some sort of bowel condition because I've always had bowel problems since I was a child. But yeah, it just got worse and worse. And then I ended up like getting blue lighted into A&E. But yeah, I agree with Kat. There's just not a lot of things. People misconstrue it for Crohn's disease and misconstrue it for Crohn's disease. And now I'm like, yeah, it's like cousin of Crohn's because, not sisters, but cousins because it's different. So it helps people look at it in a different way. But I think there just needs to be a bit more awareness, but also like a bit of assurance to say, don't fear. It probably isn't cancer. It could be such and such and such because there's a lot between cancer and this. I mean, obviously some people will get that diagnosis, but just encouraging people to even go to the doctors. I think there needs to be a little bit more reassurance and awareness about what it could be rather than what it is, and have that dark doom end. But I mean, for me, it was really severe, and I've actually got a stoma now. So I was a bit unlucky with everything. I just failed all medications and things. And again, there's just a lot about reassurance there. You just hop onto medication. And, sometimes you just go with what the doctors are saying. But looking back, if I had a bit more information, I would have been able to advocate for myself a little bit more and just say, actually, I want to try this one and, look at side effects and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot that's missing out there.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. It's so important to hear what you have to say and share your experience. And I think there's a clear call for more conversations and more awareness and just more kind of language around this. So I really appreciate you both sharing with us. And I'm sure we'll hear from you at some point. And we really, really loved having you as part of this event. So thank you so much, guys. Now I'd love to introduce Amy. And Amy is a manager in the health information team at Cancer Research UK. She's working to kind of inform and engage the public with these evidence-based informations on cancer risk prevention and early diagnosis. So also really kind of similar to what Priscilla and Kat were calling for. And more recently, Amy's actually been working on the Bowel Babe Fund, which was started in memory of Dame Deborah to support a range of health awareness activity. And that was really just to kind of follow on with her legacy of smashing the poo taboo, which was amazing what she managed to do. So yeah, to raise awareness of screening and encourage help seeking and all of those sorts of things. So Amy, can you tell me a little bit about how taboos come up in your work on cancer?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks so much to Kat and Priscilla for sharing their story. It's so important. And I'll definitely touch on some of the things that Priscilla brought up in particular on cancer a bit later on. But to start with, talking about cancer and taboo more generally is a really good place to start because stigma and taboo, they're rife when it comes to cancer generally. Of course, you're going to get taboos really specific to certain cancer types, but there are a lot of broader issues that will cut across many areas, particularly when it comes to help seeking. So this means to successfully tackle taboos around bowel cancer, we need to address cancer taboos more widely. So just the concept of acknowledging cancer itself in some groups is a taboo. It's an issue that was more prevalent, 50 years or so ago when we'd made less progress against cancer, and it wasn't uncommon to refer to it as the dreaded C word. Now, promisingly, we have a wave of people over time less fearful and more comfortable with it as a topic, but it isn't in the case for everyone, in particular for certain communities, and that remains a stark inequality. So it means some communities just don't talk about it at all, and the problem with that is like multifold. It can lead to lack of awareness of what to look out for. It's a barrier to people disclosing their symptoms. It leaves people in the dark about their family history of cancer, which is obviously really important for risk appraisal. And it can perpetuate that fear cycle in those communities. So it's really important we work on that more generally. I just also wanted to mention in relation to general behaviours around cancer and help seeking, we did commission some qualitative research with Yonder agency really recently with a sample focused on audiences with inequalities. And we saw that experiences of judgment and being stigmatized by health professionals could be particularly damaging to help-seeking behaviours. Judgment and shame were one of the core themes in that. So just to break that down slightly, so people who smoke, not surprising that people feel judged for smoking, and people have had experiences where their symptoms are felt to have been dismissed as relating to smoking without proper investigation. People even feel that they've been blamed, health issues have been blamed for reasons they don't believe are linked to smoking at all. So this can delay people's help seeking for symptoms. The fact they feel like they're going to be judged in that way, not treated correctly. Some people actually think there's no point going until they've managed to stop smoking entirely. All the while, you're like the earlier you go to the doctor, the more likely you're going to get an early stage diagnosis if it is cancer. So it's really important we help people to feel like they can present as soon as possible. It's a similar thing with people who are overweight. They can feel this judgment and shame, and with symptoms often brought to their way. More interestingly as well, a new theme for us was not having the COVID vaccine was a source of shame and judgment as well here, because people feeling like, what's the reaction going to be that they haven't had it? But also underlying that as well, there's some distrust in health professionals, and people think, maybe it wasn't necessary or wasn't tested or regulated right. So all these things are playing into that. So the effect of these inequalities is that people can feel dismissed or talked down to health professionals, and in turn they feel like their symptoms may not be taken seriously or diagnosed properly.
It's so interesting picking up from what Kat and Priscilla were saying as well, that there's that journey to recognizing it in yourself, and then there's that other journey for when you take it into the medical, like health professional sphere, and how much that kind of judgment and shame is throughout that whole like kind of journey for people. And I wondered how kind of these taboos affect bowel cancer specifically, or bowel-related cancer specifically.
Yeah, so as it says in cancer at an early stage, it means treatment is more likely to be successful. Yeah, as Priscilla said, you can Google things, and even though in most cases it won't be cancer, it can be scary because, it might be. Talking about it sooner makes that difference. Like we have a really stark stat that more than 9 in 10 people with bowel cancer will survive their disease for 5 years or more if it's diagnosed at the earliest stage. And this falls to 1 in 10 people surviving their disease for 5 years or more when it's diagnosed at the most advanced stage. So, it's always worth getting checked out. With stigma around smoking and overweight, it's really relevant because they are both risk factors for cancer in of themselves. So, it adds all the more reason that we need to help people feel like they can present. And actually on the flip of that, people who don't smoke can sometimes feel like, because of the image that's been presented by the media and public campaigns, that you have to have an unhealthy lifestyle or actually be presenting as really, really unwell to be a cancer patient. They might not even present early as well. So there's all these things playing into it. But yeah, that general anticipated fear of being lectured or patronized or previous bad experience for a health professional leads to these fears that they're going to be blamed. And some even say they feel unworthy of care or using up resource, which is really such a shame and something we need to work on. And, we see lots of intersecting factors here, from cultural background, lifestyle, and type of symptom, just to name a few. So that means like taboos negatively impact like the whole patient interval part of the pathway, which includes assessing those symptoms, symptom appraisal, and help seeking, and then the likelihood of an early stage diagnosis.
And that stat is so stark around bowel cancer and the likelihood and the difference in when you get that diagnosis. And have you kind of experienced in your research or in your kind of knowledge that bowel and poo being a symptom that people don't want to talk about is really getting in the way of some of this?
Yeah, bowel is definitely a cancer type where taboos are more prevalent than some other types. It's talking about the bowel symptoms in the first place, being able to say them out loud, not just to your doctor, but to people around you, your family, your friends. There's this idea of activating your social network, it's called in the research. We know that people who activate that network, i.e. talk to people close to them about their symptoms, are then more likely to take that step to seek professional help. So that's really important that they can have even that conversation with people around them. Then there's, of course, worry about what the tests are going to maybe involve in order to diagnose, and worrying about what the treatment and impact of quality of life is like. Also, there can be taboo around the process of taking part in bowel screening. It does involve getting a sample of your poo in your own home. People talk about it being disgusting to deal with poo, embarrassed due to it being a private area. They may think of it as shameful. And actually on that embarrassment point, We have intel from when we created our leaflets saying we had the language, it was around don't be embarrassed. And actually it didn't land well with the audience in this situation. People's feedback was embarrassment is a feeling, I can't just switch it off. So it worked better for us to acknowledge, like, we know it can feel embarrassing, but it's really important you do talk to your doctor. And then these are the possible tools or advice we can give you to make that easier.
I love that they're kind of feeding that back, that actually it's going to be embarrassing, but we just want you to be with us while we go through it and support us in that journey of embarrassment, and that's okay. But I'd love to hear a little bit just before we end about your work with the Bowel Babe Fund and how it's kind of giving you this other avenue to help change public perceptions and improve these outcomes for bowel cancer patients.
Yeah, of course. Bowel Babe Fund is definitely our biggest opportunity in the taboo space around bowel. As you mentioned, it was set up in 2022 after Deborah James sadly died of bowel cancer, and it's to continue her legacy. And part of the fund is, as well as raising money for cutting edge research into bowel, it's to continue the amazing work Deborah was doing on raising awareness on signs and symptoms, the diagnosis, and talking about it in a really open and frank way. In April, for Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, we planned a range of health awareness activity and had lots of aims. But part of that was breaking down stigma around poo and bowel cancer. We call it smashing poo taboos and starting that conversation. So as part of that campaign, we did have a suite of posters. We called them the poosters. I think we have a couple we're able to share.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, that would be great.
Just to give you a bit of an example of what these look like. So yeah, we were really excited by this as it kind of gave us a chance to trial sharing our more typical health messaging using Bowel Babe Fun tone of voice, which is more flexible and slightly more light-hearted relative to the core CRUK brand. I think there's a couple that might be on the next slide as well. Thanks so much. So yeah, what we had at this point was the current warm audience for Bowel Babe Fun was primarily in the social space. It was women aged around 35 to 54, slightly younger than the CRUK's core audience and of higher social grades. Usually, unless we're targeting a really specific group, we'd prioritize lower social grade, 50 plus, and sometimes a male skew, depending on the message. But these posters ended up giving us an amazing opportunity to reach CRUK's more typical target audience through the Bowel Babe Fun tone of voice. And it ended up being so well received. It was picked up by many of our corporate partners. They really liked this refreshed take on the comms we usually provide. It had multiple features in the Evening Standard and went out to road chef service stations, and they put those on like the mirrors of toilets, and there was big digital screens outside the service stations themselves. So that was really brilliant for us in terms of demographic and footfall. And another place these posters were in CRUK shops, which is also exciting. We don't usually put health information in shops, particularly not to do with poo. So it gave us a chance to do a bit of evaluation around this work. So there were intercepts conducted with customers and visitors in CRUK stores. I think there's lots of intel on that, but what I'm going to talk about today is relevant to taboos. In terms of comms effectiveness for all metrics measured, there was a really overall positive response. Whether it was humorous was more split. So we had 46% saying they agree, 87% being neutral, 27% disagreeing. However, disagreeing didn't necessarily mean it was leading to negative feelings. When asked, the most common feeling was positive, like insightful, inspiring, interesting. Nothing along the lines of offensive, inappropriate, or disrespectful. Couple of people did talk about fear and anxiety, so that's something we need to be mindful of when we do testing going forward, making these campaigns bigger. But one other thing to mention was appropriateness. We did ask if it was appropriate to use shops as a space to share information on certain bowel cancer topics. And we have 95% of people agreeing or strongly agreeing that it was appropriate to display health information on bowel cancer, changes in bowel habits, and checking your poo in CRUK shops. And there's also some stats showing that there really is a knowledge gap in the customers who we spoke to. So there's a big opportunity here to keep building on this.
Amy. We're so excited to hear what you're going to be doing next, and we'll share some updates on our kind of follow-up to this session and some other things. So thank you so much for sharing. It's really been amazing to have you here to talk through this all. So excited for what's next with the Bowel Babe brand and the work you're doing. Thanks so much, Amy. So now we're going to hear a little bit from Claire and Matt from Andrax, and they'll be joining us to share more about their groundbreaking Get Comfortable campaign. If you haven't seen it, definitely go see it. Their collaboration with Bowel Cancer UK and what it means to be a brand really taking the lead on breaking down the poo taboo. So love Matt and Claire, if you're there, could you tell us a little bit more about the Get Comfortable campaign and how it came about?
Sure, yeah. So first thing to say hello everyone, and I'm delighted that we're here because I've been working in the bodily fluids industry for the last 10 years, and there aren't many of these events. So it's great that we're having this session and talking about it. I think that the truth is, a lot of it came from some of those triggers in society, like Deborah James calling out some of the ridiculousness of our behaviour and our society. So, I think she and a number of others have a lot to be proud of for kind of triggering a conversation, really. But really, I think it came from a number of insights. We really wanted to understand what the root causes were for why we don't have a particularly healthy relationship with poo, with the toilet, with our body, and and why that happens, and why you get people delaying seeing a doctor when they know that there's something wrong with their body and things like that. So a lot of it comes from a number of small behavioral insights that we noticed over time, but that can start having a compounding effect on culture. So human avoidance of this topic, which is a very personal thing, then spills into your relationship with your children and how you teach them habits that last a lifetime, how you teach them to toilet train. And if you don't, that then has an impact on schooling and, teachers having to spend a lot of their time with children who aren't toilet trained in school, which then has an impact on education, all the way through then to really big life or death kind of insights around the length of time it takes people to go and see a doctor. I think Claire is the best person to talk about all this, and she's an encyclopedia of insight. But I think the really interesting thing is it comes from a lot of very individual behavioural hang-ups that we have, but you can start to see the impact spreading through culture and society more widely.
Yeah, I love that is it the toilet truths, I think, and it's a great name for them. Claire, if you could share a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so as we were kind of having ideas around this, we put together a list of what we called the toilet truths, which was all the things we thought, I wonder if other people do this, or I wonder if other people think this. And it was things as simple as, I wonder if other people get the ick when they arrive in a toilet and there's urine on the seats, or if they need a poo in the office, do they go to a different floor of the building so that they're far away from their place of work? We took this list to over 1,000 people to find out to what extent there was commonality. The amazing thing is that 100% people could relate to at least one of these toilet truths. There wasn't anything that got more than 70% agreement. It explains why the taboo is kind of being perpetuated, because there's nothing where you can come out with it and you can be really confident that everyone will say, oh yeah, I agree with that. I can relate to that. Still a bit of a risk if you want to find support and you want to say something out loud. However, what people could agree on was that it shouldn't be a taboo. So we did say, should we be breaking down this taboo in our society? Not Andrex specifically, should we as a society be tackling this? 86% of people said, yes, we should, which was really interesting because far less than 86% of people felt like they were actually able to do that at the time. So when we said, are you able to talk to someone about this? It is less. So there's a real gap there. People are willing, but they don't yet feel able. And it's especially interesting to us because Kimberly-Clark, who's the parent company of Andrex, we also own a incontinence brand called Depend. And when we speak to people in that taboo space, people say, I want privacy, I want discretion, I want to be able to go about my life and keep this a secret, and that's the most supportive thing people can do. So it's a very different reaction we got in the bowel space. That people are ready to see that taboo smashed.
So did that feed into, Matt, your kind of campaigns and the...
Yeah, no, massively. I think the thing that unites all of those insights is that generally the enemy we're facing is that people try and avoid this topic because of embarrassment, shame, prudery, disgust, whatever it might be, because of a lack of language that's not, metaphorical and all this kind of stuff. So avoidance was really the thing that unites everything. And, very clumsily, because, Claire's just articulated some really nuanced, really interesting insights. What we really said was that the UK is suffering from social constipation. That's kind of the way that we've coined it, is that we're so kind of unable to access how we're feeling about ourselves and even our bodies that we actively avoided and almost put a bit of a wall up. And so, we had a really clear sense of what we therefore needed to do. We're a very big brand that has the ability to speak to and also provide product for pretty much anyone. And so we were really clear that we needed to start sparking some of that change. So our mission really is that we want to kind of help people confront their own toilet hang-ups so that they can start making just small changes to their habits that are just a bit healthier and have ultimately a healthy relationship with their body in the bathroom. And so I think it's really interesting when we think about taboos, because I think it is right that as a society we're more comfortable being able to talk about this. But I think the first conversation that people need to have is with themselves. So we talk a lot about enabling and triggering self-reflection rather than necessarily going out there and saying, have a conversation with someone about the poo you just had. That's probably unrealistic, maybe unnecessary in certain cases. But by being able to access how you're feeling about your body, or how you're feeling about how clean you feel after you go to the toilet, or where you go to the toilet and what impact it has, you can make more positive, confident changes or choices.
Absolutely.
And that might be the choice to go when you need to go to the toilet, or it might be the choice to listen to your body and go and seek some help. But all of those are just positive, confident choices. So that's where Get Comfortable comes from as a platform. It's just saying, if we can help you have a little bit more confidence in your choices, then you can make change.
Absolutely. And it's something that resonates with us as a charity as well. And even if the kind of conversation is happening, it doesn't necessarily mean that what's happening on an individual level and people are having that with themselves. It's a really good point. And I'd love to hear, Claire, you mentioned the other day when we were chatting some really lovely research about how things have moved forward. And it's kind of a really nice thing to share on this with this group, because we're all sort of pulling in the same direction.
Yeah. So I think good news for everyone in this group. We've got a tracking study. So every week we check in with a group of not the same people, different people every week. So we can see how attitudes are changing over time. And because it's over time, it's not affected by things like the weather making people positive on one day, because we've got that many touch points, which is great. And what we've seen in the last 6 months is we have seen direct attitudes moving in the right directions. And the things we track are, if you had a problem, would you be confident in noticing it? Would you be confident talking to your friends? How about your family? How about your GP? How long would you feel like would be a good idea to wait before talking to your GP? So we can see almost all of these metrics have moved in a positive direction in the last 6 months. So this isn't just the Andrex Get Comfortable campaign. It's the collection of all the activities that happen that move this needle, which is absolutely great. As Amy has alluded to, we do see some subgroups moving faster than others, which is just to be expected. Really, really good news for all of us with the mission that we're trying to get to. There's a long way to go, but at least it's working.
It's great to see that positive movement, and things are changing for the better. And just before I move on, Matt, I wanted to hear a little bit about how you've put some of your you've collaborated with Bowel Cancer UK to put some signs and symptoms on the rolls, and how that's kind of opened up a bigger opportunity for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was again, it was triggered by Dame Deborah James, and she quite rightly called us out literally and said, "Why don't you just put them on? What's the downside?" And she was absolutely right. I think probably doing that's a really simple, easy change we can make for those who need it. I think what we've reflected on is that as a big brand, our role is not really to help people when they have cancer. That's what Amy does brilliantly. That's what Cancer Research, Bowel Cancer UK do. Our role is to start promoting a more positive, proactive relationship with your body and with the bathroom and with this topic. So, we're partnering with amazing partners who can provide exactly what people need if they get to the point that they're having symptoms or have a cancer. But what we can do is to try and help them either get to that point more quickly, or to just have a more healthy relationship where they can listen to their body and they can, understand what's coming out of it, and also do something in a slightly more healthy way or proactive way. So I think it's kind of opened up for us almost like a responsibility that we need to start triggering some of this change. I think Kat and Priscilla talked about language, and if a brand like Andrex can't say poo, who is going to say the word poo? And by the way, we were part of the problem. We helped people avoid it. We said, don't worry about what you actually use Andrex for. Here's a puppy. Don't think about what it's actually for. Here's a metaphor for something else. So we're really changing the way we talk. We're changing the way we act, and ultimately trying to promote just more positive body relationships. So that if someone does get to that point where something's changing, they can do something with more confidence or more quickly and catch it earlier. It's kind of opened up a whole change in the way our brands acting and showing up and what we do, which is great.
That's fantastic to hear. We're so excited that a brand as big as Andrax is kind of busting that taboo earlier on before we get to those points that we've heard about. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on to chat to us about it. Really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce our final showcase for today, the fabulous Nina. Nina is a natural chef and a functional medicine health coach as well. She does many things. She has many hats. And she is also a food educator, a writer, and specializes in gut health. So Nina, I would love to ask you a little bit more about the kind of conversation that we started. Actually, it kind of started our deep dive into this subject, which is about how we see a lot of conversations around gut health being really aestheticized in the wellness sphere. But how have they impacted the taboos around poo and bowel health? Because they're quite different.
Yeah, no, great. So just to say thanks to everyone who's shared before, because there's been lots of really great sort of segues kind of into the work that I do. And really great to hear all the work being done to kind of get people talking about this and breaking these taboos. But you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the kinds of like almost fetishizing of gut health is really removed really the reality of what it is. We're talking about poo, what comes out. And I think, when we spoke, so we were talking about how poo is an integral part of like understanding what's going on in your gut. And it's a really important indicator for your health and well-being. So, you really can't talk about gut health and not talk about poop. And obviously, there's lots of, as we said today, lots of taboos wrapped up into, poo being smelly, poo being, unsightly. But again, everybody poos. And, I think we talk about it probably until the age of 4 or 5, quite openly. But suddenly we kind of, shut down and we learn that we don't talk about poo. But I think we need to be talking about it because it's integral to our health and well-being. And again, some of the conversations we had about trying to give people the language and normalizing these discussions is really, really important for doing that and making sure that people have accurate health information to not just, again, understand what's happening when there's adverse health outcomes attached to it, like, bowel cancer or colitis, but also kind of what they need to know to understand in the day to day, like how does what I eat impact on what comes out of my bum and ends up in the toilet. So, and that's really what gut health is really in essence about. It's not about, beautiful aesthetics. It's not about powders in packets or supplements in a bottle. It's really about, understanding what's going in your body and what's coming out.
It's so interesting because I think you mentioned the other day people talk quite abstractly about the microbiome. It's like an abstract context almost. It's like it lives somewhere else. And you're not really making the connection within yourself to the reality. I wonder how that shows up in your work, because a lot of your work is about food and nutrition. And how do you kind of marry the two together during your work if you're wanting to talk about poo and food?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand kind of what the microbiome is. But again, it's a concept that is, we don't really understand what the microbiome in the gut is doing. And I think people often don't even know that the microbiome is basically in the cellular wall and cellular lining inside the digestive tract. So that is from your mouth all the way out to your anus. There's, trillions of bacteria living in there. And that's essentially where your microbiome is. But again, a lot of what happens and how it works is still being researched. But I think what we really need to kind of get to grips with and understand is that the microbiome is a crucial tool in actually impacting on how you digest your food, what you excrete at the end. And again, some of that is actually coming out in your poo as well, the kind of, cells and the mucus that line the gut. So I think if we kind of really start to understand what it is, what it means, we can really apply it to like the very basic principles of kind of what comes in and what goes out. I think it kind of becomes more relatable. But again, yes, I get that it is a very, kind of wide and grand topic. But I think we can start to chip away at it if we kind of make it.
Absolutely. And we'll touch on the kind of practical ways and these amazing ideas that you have at the end. But before we get there, I'd love to talk a little bit, because a lot of your work is in inclusivity as well. And we had a chat the other day, which was quite interesting, about inclusivity in the gut and a health and wellness space. Yeah, is there anything that we could share around how we can sort of democratize this information almost?
No, definitely. I think, again, a lot of what I do is helping people, as Matt was saying, is like to understand what's going in their body and to be able to have the knowledge and the resources to do what they need to do to look after their health. And I think when we give people that sort of skill set, that knowledge, that information, they're able to make better choices about what they eat, and they know why they're eating it and then what it does for their body. So I do a lot of work around helping people to change those individual patterns, those behaviors, and to find like those more health seeking behaviors that will help them kind of change the state of their health, but also the state of their gut, and again, what's coming out in their poo. So I think really to kind of boil this down to, how do we make it successful for everyone? I mean, we can talk about, the food we put into our body first and foremost, because most of us eat food. We eat food multiple times a day. And that is the biggest tool that we can use to look after our health and well-being, the food that we're putting in our body. And I think if we really boil down gut health to what it's really about having a diet that is, colorful, that is diverse, that's full of, whole foods. And I think, there's more and more research showing us that a lot of the kind of probiotic supplements and the powders and things like these are expensive, but they're also probably not doing what they say they're going to do. And the most effective way to look after your gut is really simple. It's to have very simple food. It's to have as much variety as you can put into your diet. And it doesn't have to be expensive. I work and have worked a lot with low income families, people on restricted budgets. And again, myself, cost of living crisis, all kind of on a restricted budget as far as food is concerned. But it can be done by, shopping in places like Aldi, buying your nuts and seeds there, or, getting a vegetable box and trying to eat kind of more seasonally available vegetables, which are lower cost, but also nutritionally really important for your body to kind of be having those things in their growing seasons. So it really is about having a diet that supports good health, but also good gut health. And it doesn't necessarily need to include powders and probiotics and, all these kind of supplements that are being sold by the wellness industry, which again, as you said, is very much targeted at and then kind of packaged as a reserve of people with a certain level of income and affluence. And again, the health and well-being more generally and good gut health shouldn't be gatekept by people with a certain level of income. So I think a lot of what we can do to really look after our gut is very simple. It's very basic, and it doesn't necessarily need to cost what it costs, in some spheres of kind of the gut health world.
No,
So
it's
yeah.
so interesting. And I love that you kind of reflected on how those things are being packaged up and sold, whereas actually there's just some really basic information that will level this all out for everybody, and we can all have
Mhm.
access to. So I know we talked a little bit the other day about kind of the practical things to take away from today. Like, what do we need to do practically to start these? And like, in your mind, what's needed?
Yeah. So as I think, we were saying, like that self-awareness, like what's going on with my body, like being in touch with your body, knowing what you're putting in and how that's making you feel, being able to look in the toilet and not feel that kind of self-repulsion, to actually be like, okay, well, what's in here? And like, what is this telling me about my health and well-being? If it's, a smooth poo, a chunky poo, if it's in bits, if it's foamy, if it's red, if it, these are all signs and symptoms that something's going on. So we need to be able to actually look to understand, like, what's going on in my body and feel that, you can then access the appropriate information and go to the appropriate people to get support if you're worried about what's coming out. But again, I think, we can start by just looking at our poo and understanding what that means.
Absolutely. And I think that's quite similar to what everybody's been talking about, and Matt as well, the kind of recognizing or acknowledge that in yourself first. And Kat and Priscilla shared a lot with us about how there's this kind of lack of language around it and not knowing how to describe those things. But you had some ideas about, well, you share some kind of tools with your clients, and you've got some ideas about how to introduce that to kids as well. Can you tell us a bit more about
Yeah, definitely. So when I start working with clients, like one of the first things we talk about is poo. And again, I know that is, sometimes really uncomfortable to do and people are very shy talking about it. But, I explain to them that this is a really important indicator of what's going on in your body. So what's going on in your body and also what's going in your body or not going in some cases. So, we have to, like, if we really want to make strides in your health, we have to understand what your poo looks like. So I give my clients the Bristol stool chart and I get them to kind of, every day look in the toilet, give their poo a number, tell me how many times a day they're going, if there's any bloating or wind and what that's like. So I help them to be more, aware of what's going on, but also to give them the tools to kind of be more descriptive. And then I help them to connect those dots. So, perhaps if they've had, a really heavy night drinking or a weekend full of alcohol, they'll see that, for the next 2 days, they've had runny poo. And we kind of start to make those connections. And when they see and understand, the ways in which what they're putting in their body can impact on their poo, it really starts to kind of make it it gives people that knowledge and that vocabulary and that understanding, and also the tools to then make those shifts and adjustments so that they can have nice smooth poo. Because that's the goal, right? To have a nice smooth solid poo, not too many pieces, nice brown color, not too many crags. Yeah.
And I found it so interesting because you were talking about how, and Matt touched on this actually as well, how this kind of starts in when you're a kid, and you do kind of make about poo as a joke when you're a kid, but there's this lack of language that we've all grown up with that's really getting in the way of us being able to even acknowledge, what's going on with ourselves, let alone then tell a doctor about it. So you had a couple of ideas about how to share this information with kids as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the clients I work with are parents, and they're obviously looking out for their own health and well-being, but they've got other people they're responsible for as well. And often that means they're making, dietary changes at home, putting different foods on the plate. And so we talk about how to do that with their kids. We're talking about fiber, example, and how if you're eating lots of fruits and veg and nuts and seeds, that's really great fiber, and your gut loves fiber, and then you get nice poos that sink to the bottom of the toilet, and that's what you want. Getting them to print out things like the Bristol stool chart and keep sticking it in the bathroom so that the kids can kind of get up and have a look and go, oh, Mum, I did a number 3 today, or I did a number 1, and then you can kind of say, oh, well, you had enough water, or have you you're not been eating your vegetables, so maybe that's why. So it helps them to be able to kind of have that information accessible and in the forefront of their mind, and then they can talk about it and make the link between what's going on in their life and what's coming out in the toilet.
I love that idea. It's fantastic. And it would probably help a lot of us grown-ups who are struggling with being able to, identify that in ourselves as well. It's fantastic to hear a little bit about it. And I found it really interesting to hear about the kind of moving past the disgust that we might feel about ourselves and engaging with our bodies, which is something that came up in another part of our taboos around. It was more around sort of periods and discharge and things like that, but it's very similar. Without being able to notice what's going on with yourself, you'll then miss all those signs and symptoms that there might potentially be something going wrong. Is there anything that you would kind of give as a takeaway for people to get more comfortable with their bodies themselves and what's coming out of them?
Yeah, I think again, if we start thinking about what we're putting in, and again, I know this is not the case for everyone. Obviously, we know Kat and Priscilla shared, there are instances where your body, has an autoimmune condition and there are things going on that you really can't control. But if in an otherwise healthy body, the things that we're putting into our body will show up in our poo, and it will also change the consistency of our poo. So if you're not drinking enough water, then you're probably going to have a really hard time pooing, because poo is like 75% water. So there's things that you need to just things that you can do. So what you're putting in will really help you see kind of what's coming out, and it'll and those tweaks and changes that you make to your everyday kind of inputs can have an effect on your poo. So again, thinking about the quality of the food that you're putting in, how much hydration you're having, thinking about your sleep and making sure you're doing that and not kind of scrolling till all the hours. All of that has an impact on, the poo, because it has an impact on the gut. And if we can kind of think about the gut in itself and how it functions, and kind of, the links between what happens in our gut and what comes out in the toilet, the more we think about looking after that gut, the more we can kind of start to see the evidence in the toilet of a good, healthy gut.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nina. And I think we'll all be going away to order a copy of the Bristol stool chart poster.
Print it out.
Saving some cash on those powders and just having a little look at what's going on. Thank you so much, Nina. It's been fab to talk to you. That's actually all we have time for today. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers. It's been completely fascinating to hear all of your different experiences and things that you've brought along to this. And it's really heartening to hear that everybody's kind of pulling for the same thing. And as Claire said, things are actually making a difference. Thank you so much again to everybody.
A note for the listeners. As this episode was audio recorded live, speakers reference material shown on the screen at the event, including the Poosters campaign and the Bristol stool chart. We'll share all of this in the show notes. If anything you've heard today feels familiar, if you've been putting off a conversation you have thought you needed to have with a doctor, a friend, or just yourself, let this be your sign to say it out loud. It gets easier the moment you do. For information and support on bowel cancer, you can contact Bowel Cancer UK on their helpline or at bowelcanceruk.org.uk or Cancer Research UK, cancerresearchuk.org. For information and support on Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, you can contact Crohn's and Colitis UK on the helpline or at crohnsandcolitis.org.uk. For general gut health and nutrition support, you can find guidance through Guts UK at gutscharity.org.uk. Links and details are all in the show notes.